Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the ONDC network and the possibilities that India's internet business can have. And let's continue that by talking about another space where we're putting, the spotlight on D2C in particular, which is direct to consumer. The consumer sector, according to JPMorgan, beauty and personal care segments are growing market share and we are seeing some fragmentation in select categories as well. To discuss this and more, we are joined by a rare voice. Latika Chopra, who's the Executive Director, Consumer Research at JPMorgan, joins us from the sidelines of JPMorgan India Investor Summit. Latika, thank you so much for joining in. And here's, the first question. Everyone's talking about how big D2C or direct to consumer happened or became during the pandemic. Post-pandemic, these companies are facing scalability challenges. Post-pandemic, these companies are facing, higher consumer acquisition costs as well. So does that mean the ball in the FMCG space still lies in the court of the larger players and not these smaller disruptors?
Hi, thank you everyone for having me today. So clearly, D2C is a trend which is going to, it's going to remain. It's a fairly structural trend which is going to stay with us, I think, for a very long time. Clearly, we saw a lot of disruption during pandemic on back of this. But one has to not forget the part that D2C brands basically are challenging the whole status quo, right? They're challenging the way incumbents have typically thought about the beauty and personal care category. They have actually come out with figuring out consumer niches. They have basically following a lot of data-backed decisions on marketing, how to reach a consumer base in a very targeted manner. So I think some of the new trends that they have started, some of the new practices and approaches that they have started towards consumers are not going to go away. Rather, we believe incumbents actually got the wake-up call, and they are actually also approaching the new target consumer segments in a similar manner. So whether you see incumbents following up a lot more on the online piece, how they're increasing their e-commerce salience, about 2-3 years ago, for most companies, this was about, 4-5% of their revenue base. Now it's more like, 8 to 10% in most cases. And I guess I've never heard so much focus on innovation intensity, reducing the time to put out a new product into the market. And this is all driving a lot more consumer fragmentation. So I don't think the D2C theme is going away. But yes, the D2C brands have to scale them. And in order to scale beyond the whole online piece, they have to step into more offline space, so they also have to learn a little bit more on traditional channels, how to adapt their product base to that. And of course, there was an easy money which definitely helped them. They have to be now more watchful about the profitability aspect of it. And we are seeing D2C brands incrementally trying to do so. Clearly, compared to food, I think beauty and personal care kind of scores better. It has better gross margins. It is able to cover the cost of delivery better. But clearly, things are not one way this time. And I guess both D2C companies and incumbents will coexist. They will continue to coexist. Rather, we need to see what it leads to. So, whether there's more consolidation in the space, we're already seeing that. We are seeing...
Sure. Latika, I just wanted to interrupt you because we are a little bit, on a time schedule. Just wanted to understand that, when you're talking about your regular FMCG companies which are listed, how much of a theme will M&A be, according to you, when it comes to D2C brands? Do you expect them to get more aggressive to get them into their portfolios? Is that a theme that we could probably see play out?
I think it depends actually on what kind of attributes they really want to bring. Is it the technology that they want to bring? Is it the, is it the consumer technology aspect that they want to bring in? It is what they want to achieve. At times, you have to appreciate the fact that a lot of incumbents work with very scaled up brands, right? So they're not very used to working with brands which are, 200, 300 crores in a turnover, right? They typically try to work with, 500 crore plus kind of brands. So, and clearly, there is a speed to innovation. There is a speed to come out with new concepts, trials with the consumers. So we do think that incumbents will be, looking at inorganic growth. They might be more selective about it. We have few companies who have acquired a couple of D2C brands, but they have tried to keep them very separate from the running of those operations from their regular business. So I guess we'll see more action definitely here. But at the same time, I would say that companies are also building their own organic, D2C brands. Rather, there are a lot of e-commerce first launches that are happening on, from learnings that they are seeing from these new age brands. So I think it's going to happen both ways.
It's very interesting, right? Because I know for a fact, at least, personally, all of us millennials here and even Gen Z, a lot of our consumer spending decisions are affected by social commerce. No two ways about that. And that just brings us to the question that are these D2C brands going to actually disrupt some of the traditional brands? I mean, in your report, you do say that names like Marico, Dabur, Godrej Consumer are relatively unaffected by this disruption. But how can you be so confident? Don't you think that they sort of need to get their act together because a lot of the spending decisions are affected by social commerce now?
Okay, so I'll refrain from making specific comments on the companies, but let me put it this way, not every category is going to behave in the same manner, right? So I think the categories which are more fast growing, which are very nascent, where you see, a lot more action could be possible. There are a lot of unmet demands, needs of the consumers. I guess those are the categories where we're seeing a lot of fragmentation, so a category like skincare, for example, a lot of fragmentation, incumbents have been losing market share. They were sitting on very hefty market shares. They've been losing market share. But some of the more traditional categories, where, probably penetration levels are already very high, there is not very exciting growth prospects from mid to long-term prospects are probably the ones which are relatively more insulated. So I think every category will behave very differently. But yes, I think D2C brands and a lot of new age brands, even from the incumbents, will probably keep everybody on their toes, and competitive landscape is definitely evolving at a very rapid pace. And it's not that incumbents are going to lose market share, rather honestly, over the whole period of pandemic and recent years, we've actually seen the bigger brands actually getting bigger because of various nuances of how the consumption landscape has been. But definitely we would see more investments, more strategic priorities being given towards innovation, R&D, distribution, participating in different channels, in a very calibrated, prudent manner, to stay ahead of the curve. And we will see more fragmentation because that's the way consumer is behaving, right? There's this whole talk about personalized consumer access. And that's the whole thing which is behind, a higher competitive intensity as well.
Take that point, and personalization was a big mega trend that HUL spoke about in their last trend setting PowerPoint presentation that they made to analysts as well. Latika, always a pleasure speaking with you. This is this is a space that we will keep continuing to track with regards to everything that takes place out here. And I like the fact that you said D2C actually went ahead and gave a bit of a jolt to all the traditional FMCG companies. So now that they've figured out that, okay, this is something that is working, what they do with it is extremely important, because, what the traditional FMCG companies have is offline presence and a lot of cash. What the D2C players have is brand presence. So is there a case for some synergies out there, more M&A? Or not is something we'll watch out for.
Actually, I was just thinking, the last 5 purchases that I made was largely because of social commerce influence. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that just speaks of the trend that this generation perhaps
Not to mention, over 600 D2C brands in India, $100 billion market
it's size, $100 billion
probably
market.
by
Yes.
FY25 is what is estimated for the entire market. But nonetheless,
am I allowed to shamelessly plug another Mad About Markets episode?
You can just be plugged, because everything you plug is shameless now. Okay, well, let's move on. And let's thank Latika for joining us. And